week 15 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few wide receivers I looked at off the wire this week. The first guy, Odell Beckham Jr., the Baltimore Ravens. Odell definitely off to a slow start the first 2 months of the season, but he's starting to get into the playbook a little bit more. And him and Lamar Jackson are definitely getting a rapport going. And he's been a deep ball threat over the last few weeks here, is Odell for this Raven team. Week 10 versus Cleveland, 1 catch, 40 yards, a touchdown. Week 11 versus the Bengals, 4 catches, 116 yards. Week 12 at the Chargers, 3 catches, 34 yards. And now week 14, after the bye, 4 catches, 97 yards, and a touchdown. So nice 10 targets in that game for Odell Beckham. He's got a good matchup coming up at the Jacksonville Jaguars in week 15 that give up the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. So right now, with Mark Andrews out for the year, Beckham's been more in the playbook the last few weeks. He's going out there and making plays, and he's definitely a wide receiver to go out there and get in 59% of fantasy leagues. The next wide receiver is another veteran wideout, Juju Smith-Schuster of the New England Patriots. So Juju Smith-Schuster, he really hasn't done much this season after signing a nice contract in the offseason, but a lot of injuries over here in New England. Him and Bailey Zapp actually had a good rapport. Now week 14 game at the Steelers, and this New England Patriot team actually moved the football down the field and won that game 21-18. So the last few weeks here for Juju, like I said, he didn't do much until week 14. Week 12 at the Giants, 2 catches, 10 yards. Week 13 versus the Chargers, a catch, 11 yards. And week 14, a solid game, 4 catches, 90 yards. So week 15, it's going to be a game versus the Chiefs, where obviously I expect them down early and often is this New England Patriot team. And I got to play catch-up and throw the football a whole lot. So right now, after coming off a nice game and available in 86% of fantasy leagues, I would give Juju Smith-Schuster an ad this week. The next wide receiver is Jay Osborne of the Minnesota Vikings. So Justin Jefferson, he got popped in the back, and he took a huge shot in that game and was immediately ruled out after going to the medical tent and back to the locker room. So KJ Osborne, obviously this season he had many opportunity and he didn't do much. And now Nick Mullins might even be the starting quarterback for this Viking team after Joshua Dobbs was pulled in the fourth quarter in that game at the Raiders where no one just could score. So the last few weeks for Osborne, the numbers haven't been there like I mentioned. Week 11 at Denver, a catch, 7 yards. Week 12 versus the Bears, 3 catches, 34 yards. And week 14 at Vegas, since he came in after Jefferson went out, only 4 catches, 15 yards, but he had 7 targets. So week 15, it's a game where they're going to have to put up points in Minnesota if they want any chance to win. And obviously this Viking team, they're in the playoff hunt, 7-6 right now, so a decent matchup on paper. But like I said, Osborne hasn't done much, but opportunity once again could arise if Jefferson's going to miss this game, and he's available in 81% of fantasy leagues. The next wide receiver is John Mechie of the Houston Texans. So Mechie, I know the last 2 weeks he hasn't done much for this Texan team, but now Nico Collins, he left the game with a foot injury, and this offense just couldn't get going at the New York Jets. It was rainy, and the Jets are one of the best defenses in the league. So like I said, Mechie, pretty much he hasn't done much, but now with Nico Collins down and possibly could be out for next week 15's game, it's pretty much down to Mechie and Robert Woods as their top wide receivers, with Tank Dell out for the season. And they got a good matchup week 15 at the Titans that give up the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. So if you want a lottery ticket and a potential breakout guy for your playoff run, or just a guy in your dynasty leagues, just someone I have on the bench just in case, he's available in 99% of fantasy leagues. And the 5th and final wide receiver I looked at off the wire is Parker Washington of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So I mentioned Washington in his ad last week after Christian Kirk went out, and he's out multiple weeks here with his injury. So Washington, the last 2 weeks, he's found the end zone. He's the 6th-round pick rookie. Week 13 versus Cincinnati, 6 catches, 61 yards, and a touch. And week 14 at Cleveland, 2 catches, 27 yards, a touchdown on the fumble loss. So Trevor Lawrence, he obviously has some confidence in getting the ball to Parker Washington. I know week 15 is a tougher matchup versus the Ravens. I give up the 3rd least amount of fantasy points to receivers on the season. But we just did see Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua have great games. I'm not saying Parker Washington, obviously he's in the class of those guys, but they do give up points to wide receivers at times. And Washington, he's a speedy wide receiver in the slot. So right now with Christian Kirk out, he's taking that spot up a little bit here, is Washington. And he's available in 94% of fantasy leagues. That's a few wide receivers I looked at off the wire in week 15 of the fantasy football season.